Hi, this is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle. This is a continuation of my series on the basic types of fishing reels, their introduction, their prominence, and the types of reels and from a design perspective, as well as some of the strengths and weaknesses of those reels. And in part one, we reviewed the conventional reel. So in part two, we're going to look at the spinning reel. And this will discuss how they came into, how they were introduced, became prominent, some of the pros and some of the cons of the reel, some of the things that are typical in terms of seeing from a maintenance perspective, and why they're so popular. So I hope you enjoy this segment. This is one of 4 segments that looks at conventional, spinning, lever drag, and level wind reels. I hope you enjoy. Please watch the others. So before we begin the segment on spinning reels, I thought that we would just take a moment and talk about reel repair. And this one doesn't come with the disclaimer, don't try any of this stuff at home. And actually that's why I formed my YouTube channels, to show everybody how to do it at home, because it's not that hard to do, but you do need a plan. And the plan generally comes in the form of thinking about what you want to do with the reel, and then go and get some information prior to you start. So here's one of the recommendations that I have. It's always to pull a schematic for the reel. And they're available out on the internet. There's plenty of places you can find it. This one is for the Shimano Stratic, and I believe I got that one at Mike's Reel Repair. That's certainly a place. You can actually go to the Shimano website or Daiwa website, or penparts.com, which is now Mystic Parts. Just go do an internet search for your reel, your model, and a schematic diagram, and generally you can pick that up. That'll tell you what to expect inside the reel as you go on to repair the reel. I also encourage you to take pictures along the way. I take pictures by videos, but you don't have to. You can use a cell phone camera or just a general digital camera or the like at critical junctures as you're removing parts, just so you can keep track of that. And as you'll see, spinning reels are probably as simple as that earliest reel that we had shown here. Not a lot of moving parts, but you do need to know what it is that you're getting into. So let's talk about spinning reels then. Spinning reels actually had their introduction pre-war. Pre-war being pre-World War II. I guess that kind of indicates what age I am. And most of them were done in Europe. There, as far as I'm aware, there's not a indication of U.S.-made ones before the before World War II. And the GIs came back from the war, and they either brought back reels made in Europe, or they brought back the ideas which became popular here. So this actually is a reel that I started fishing with all those years ago, back in the 50s. This is a Centura Pacific. It was made in France. And this is not the reel. This is one that I bought to remind me that this is the reel that I fish with. I kind of tore the heck out of mine. Half bail. Half bail had a patent. The full bail had a patent on it that didn't expire until 1954. I believe it was called the Hardy patent. So most of the manufacturers made the half bail until that patent expired, at which point they could do it themselves. So this one is an example of an early French reel. Of course, everybody grew up at that time fishing with a Mitchell 300. That was one of the earliest. You had the 300, and you had the 304 and the 324, and they became very popular. This is a reel also from Europe at the time, the half bail. This is actually a record. It was made in Switzerland. This has got a rear drag. So there were 2 popular types of drags. There were the top-end drags, like this reel, and there were the rear drags. The idea with the rear drag being you didn't have to reach over your line to provide the tension on the drag to fight a fish. So lots of examples of European reels. DAM, the Deutsche Manufacturing in Berlin made a reel, made lots of reels. And that was typical of what happened in the early 50s. And then manufacturers switched in the 60s. Penn introduced their Spinfisher line. I think this is the 704 Greenie. But they came out with the the Spinfisher in 1961. And then reels started moving to Japanese production. You had, this is a Daiwa reel. I think this is the GS30. Kind of, it's a project that needs to be done, but came up in the 1950s. And interestingly enough, post-war Japan was making reels for a lot of the U.S. department stores and the like, and Daiwa had a lot of trade names like King Neptune and the like, where they made reels for Sears, Roebuck, and Montgomery Wards and places like that. And then they started marketing their own reels a little bit later. And then, of course, our favorite bicycle manufacturer, Shimano, got in the game in the I believe it was the 1970s. And they started making fishing reels, and they still continue to this day. So what's inside of a spinning reel these days is pretty much stock. There's some variations. The Shimano Stratic is a variation, but what I'll do is I'm just going to use an example. This happens to be a Shakespeare reel, and a lot of things have changed. The types of side plates have changed from metal to graphite or plastic. In this case, it's probably plastic. Spools have either gone composite or metal. The drags have been improved. You now have carbon drag washers in there, or HT100s. Some of the weaknesses of the earlier systems, like case fractures, have been they've added bump guards to kind of fix that. They've made it a fashion industry in my mind. They've prettied up the reels, but once you take a reel open inside, very much the same structure in a reel today as it was in the 1970s for the most part, and this will indicate it. So I'm going to show you how to service a spinning reel and what makes the reel work. So I've removed the side plate screws just to make it easier for the video in terms of timing. You don't need to watch me do that. And then what you'll find is big gear drives little gear. All going all the way back to the earlier theme. Big gear drives little gear. Pinion gear goes up, and that's what causes the rotor to rotate, appropriately named rotate. And that's going to drive what would be a bail to wind the line on a fixed spool. So let's just show you what the typical components are of a spinning reel so that you know how to service that. There's a main gear, a pinion gear, a crosswind block, and a crosswind gear. And those things have been pretty much standard for the last 40 years or so in terms of what most reels incorporate underneath. The sizes are different. You'll see modern day manufacturers are telling you the space age, there you go, my age again, metals and metallurgy that go into the reels. You got Digicut gears, CNC type cut gears. You got fancy components in terms of alloys for the gears themselves, but the technology in terms of how they line and wind are pretty much the same. If you remove the screw from the crosswind block, you can pull that whole axle shaft up, which is the upper end of the block. You can remove the main gear. You'll see that on the back of most main gears you have the big teeth that are driving the pinion gear and the smaller gear which is driving the crosswind block, which makes the axle shaft go up and down. And depending on the type of reel you have, you will either get bushings or bearings. The lower end reels will incorporate bushings. The higher end reels will incorporate bearings. And they're off to the races in terms of bearing counts these days. How many bearings can you put in a reel is kind of like how many angels can you fit on the head of a pin type of a description there. There's just a lot of bearings going into reels. And folks ask me, what's the optimal number? I said 3. 1 on each side of your main gear and 1 up top on your pinion gear will get it done. Anything other than that is typically just frills. Not that it doesn't make it easier, it does. Does it improve the wear of a reel? Yeah, probably. But for the most part, I think anything more than 3 is limiting your return on investment there, and so on. So that shows you the underneath side. Big gear drives little gear. Crosswind gear makes the axle shaft go up and down. One more set. I'm going to remove the rotor here. Sometimes you have to remove the rotor to remove the side plate, depending on the type of reel that you have. This reel does not require that, so I'll just show you up top here underneath that rotor. And up top on the rotor, in this case, it has an old style anti-reverse, which is driven by an eccentric spring. The newer ones will have an anti-reverse bearing up here, or a clutch that'll do the work of this. This one's just running on a spring. If you remember back to the thing I was doing with the Ambassador, not much different in terms of technology. All right, I'm just going to pull this off to show you that there is a bearing under here. So we have one bearing in this, and if you're servicing a reel, you're going to remove that bearing, and you're going to clean that up and service it. So what are the common failure points on these reels? Well, the common failure points on these reels are in transition. These teeth on the back end of the main gear and how it intersects with the crosswind gear will strip the teeth on that if you're under snag, and if you're trying to power out, that's the first ones that are going to go, the teeth on the crosswind gear and the teeth on the back of the main gear. You will, if you don't maintain your reels and this gets dry, the sluggishness of a reel will come into play, but overall, if you do an annual service on this, you shouldn't wind up with a sluggish reel. You can see here that the axle shaft rides through and connects up top to the main gear. When that axle shaft is fully exposed, I'm just going to show it here without the rotor on. If you're on the top end of your stroke like that, and you have that axle gear sitting outside of the main gear, and you're snagged, there will be torsion that will bend this axle shaft, and that's a common failure point on spinning reels. So broken teeth, lack of lubrication, bent axle shafts, and then the consumables, the drag washers underneath. Right, the drag washers are housed inside of the spool assembly, and those will wear with use because that's what's going to hold this reel on, and the more tension you put on there, the types of fish that you have and the type of drag washer that's in there is what's going to cause that. Finally, we use this as an illustration, but this is the other point that fails on spinning reels, the bail wire. And we can kind of show it on this reel. That bail wire tends to bend if it gets hit into a post or it gets whacked against the gun wall or dropped. That tends to go. And the only time I see bail springs fail is when somebody actually opens up a reel. Here's an example of one that, this is why I picked this reel. It actually has the bail spring in here. This one is one type of a bail spring that it has. You'll notice that that spring moves up and down as you set the bail. And over time, just like that eccentric spring in the pen reel that I showed you, the Jigmaster, over time that will wear down and break eventually. And then there's another one, there's a coil spring that's used in some bail assemblies. That coil spring doesn't break, but there's a foot that intersects with the bail arm up here. Usually it's only plastic or cheap metal, and over time either the bail arm will wear or the foot will wear as a result of it moving in and out of that assembly. So if you're working on spinning reels, know that the technology really hasn't changed that much over time. You may incur more ball bearings or less ball bearings depending on the type of reel that you're working on. The keys to maintaining these is to keep these well lubricated, whether they're bearings or they're a bushing subset of the system. And that if you do find a failure, typically it's going to be in broken teeth or abused parts like a broken spring on this anti-reverse system, or dirt, which causes anti-reverse clutches to fail. So in a nutshell, Spinning reels are very simple. They look a lot different. They have a lot of different characteristics behind them, but at the end of the day, whether it's this type of reel or a reel that uses a rear drag system to put the tension on the axle shaft to hold it, either way, the mechanics inside of it are very much the same, and the failure points are very similar. So I hope that that's been informative. I hope this whole series has been informative, and I wish you the best, and I encourage you to take your reels apart, to go do the minimum service on that, and to enjoy fishing with them, and to ensure that they don't break at points in the future due to lack of maintenance. So again, this is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle. Thank you for watching. Hi, this is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle. I hope you've been enjoying my series on various types of fishing reels and the types of applications for them, their strengths and weaknesses, and why they break from time to time, and the types of problems that you see associated with them from a maintenance perspective. If you've liked this series, please indicate that on the video. If you have questions on these reels or any reel in particular, maybe you're servicing one and you're stuck, please leave that in the comments section. If you like these kinds of videos, please subscribe, as I post frequently. And if you do subscribe, please hit the notifications. That notification button will help you and will help me to grow our channels. And finally, if you have a reel that needs to be repaired and you're interested in having me service that reel, I do that by email and by mail. So please shoot me an email on the business card that follows, and I will give you the instructions to mail those reels to me. So this is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle. Have a great day.